As a campaigner and a politician, David Norris has always known what it's like to receive criticism, but even his experience as a gay rights campaigner in Holy Catholic Ireland scarcely prepared him for the battering he received during last year's presidential election. He's now produced an autobiography, which in typical style has a title which references Beckett while also managing to sound a bit dirty. It's called A Kick Against the Pricks David Norris Got After Do to You. David, you should explain, because this is actually, I knew about the Beckett reference, yes, but I didn't know anything about the biblical reference.
Well, you see, you're a cultivated literate man, Sean. It's great to be back here in this redecorated studio.
One.
No, but actually it's Acts 26:14. It's St. Paul on the road to Damascus. Just the moment when the blinding flash comes and he hears a voice calling in Hebrew, Saul, Saul, why kickest thou against the pricks? But of course I was aware of the double entendre. But a prick, I think, is appropriate because there is a sharpened goad, a stick, that you use to prod animals in a direction they might not want to go, and they often lashed out. And I took that as my title because I have so often been a sole voice questioning the establishment and kicking against the people who wanted to push not just me but the whole country in a direction that perhaps was wrong.
Tell us about your 6 months as a restaurant reviewer. I suppose this kind of ties in to a degree at least to subsequent events.
Well, I mean, I always say that I'm a bit like Rosie Probert in Under Milk Wood, who couldn't say no even to midgets. Now, I'm not saying for 1 second that Vincent Brown is in any sense physical or moral a midget, but he rang me late at night, and the person who's doing the restaurant reviews had left, and he was stuck, and he asked me would I take it on. I did it for 6 months, and I got La Rousse Gastronomique. But after about 6 months, I went in. I was trying to get rid of the job because I was getting hate mail from host people saying, you know, we used to love you when you were writing so passionately about famine in Ethiopia, but now you're stuffing your big, fat, ignorant gob in the Tribune every Sunday. We'll never vote for you again. And I started dropping hints. It didn't seem to get anywhere. And then one day I went in and there was a note. I can't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, Dear David, when I asked you to take on this job 6 months ago, you protested that you knew nothing about food and wine. And I didn't believe you, then, but I do now. Goodbye, Vincent. Yes. And he was always great fun and so courageous and honourable, paying off all the debts of Village Magazine through his broadcasting fees. I really respect that.
The person you replaced as a restaurant reviewer, who then replaced you as restaurant reviewer, was Helen Lucy Burke.
Yes, but I can't really go into that because there are legal implications.
Are there legal implications?
And I also, can I just say on that subject that I never attacked or blackguarded Miss Burke, and when things started to happen, I put out messages on social media saying, please do not attack Helen Lucy Burke. I didn't want to, because I'm not a negative person. Throughout the campaign, I always said that I would hope if I won, and I would certainly campaign on my strengths rather than anybody else's weakness. And I never went on this negative side at all. And I had ideas, and you see, my feeling was that, or is that at least I did achieve something, because it looked, and I say this in the book, as if the parties were going to have a ready-up and they were going to install a candidate. That would mean there wouldn't have been an election for 21 years. I mean, most of the people wouldn't have ever voted in the presidential election. And then I set the terms. I mean, I set the 3 pillars, the idea of mental health and well-being, which is critically important. I had to put that on the agenda with suicide and all the rest of it, as well as the positive side of things. And then entrepreneurship and culture, the creative imagination, linking all 3. And then I also raised questions about the openness of the
But nobody will remember
process.
that now, David, because of Helen Lucy Burke.
Well, I hope they will, because I hope...
But they won't, David. You know they won't.
Well, I just want to be fair. I mean, it wasn't just that. There were different stories every day. I mean,
there
I was the only one.
What I wanted to ask you, because it wasn't just her, and it does say kind of in the flyleaf of your book, you know, it does talk about, you know, a media campaign. Do you think there was actually a campaign? Do you there were actual either forces or people who had decided Norris ain't going to be president, and that's it? Certainly.
And
do you know who they were?
I do, yes. And I hope there will be an inquiry like Leveson, and I will certainly be happy to give a submission to that, as I have given to Lord Leveson's inquiry. You know, I don't think people would realise, perhaps, because every individual person, people listening out there, will get one newspaper perhaps, or read a headline in the shop, or listen to one radio program, or they won't listen to it all the time. I got it constantly, every single day. And now some of the people who wrote these things have admitted that they were completely untrue, but it's a little bit late. And the apologies are inadequate and untimely. But it was like fighting every snowflake in a blizzard.
And just to give an example about that, about the kind of things that were going on, about the whole controversy about the letters, you were contacted and said, we have these letters, we're going to publish them, and they didn't have them at all.
No.
And they forced you, or they tricked you into releasing the letters.
Well, you see, I tend to be an open-hearted person, and I thought, well, the way to address this is to publish the letter that had all the relevant information in it. That was a mistake. I mean, other people wrote letters for double murderers and so on, but they stalled and they just wouldn't release them or discuss. If I'd been politically shrewd and a good tactician, I mightn't have done that. But the problem is, if you feed a monster, then it gets a voracious appetite. And I have to say, to go back to what you asked earlier, I believe I was monster. That's the technical term that's used in the media in Britain. They decide to monster somebody. And that is a really horrible experience about which people have spoken. But there's lots more in the book, and there are also lots of laughs.
I know that. I do want to get to some of those things.
Yes.
But just, I want to be careful about this now, whether it's just... Do you think that what happened to you was just the way the media tends to operate, that it's like a pack of wolves and it sees weakness and it goes after it? Or was it something more deliberate at work here?
In some sections it was quite clearly deliberate, and the way in which I was to be treated was made clear to the staff in the newspapers.
Was that because they were supporting other candidates, you think? Or because
no, I don't think so.
We don't like that guy for whatever reason?
Well, I think I went forward because I felt that this is such a wonderful country. And when I was growing up, it was completely homogenous. I mean, everybody was white, Republican, heterosexual, all the rest of it, ticked Catholic, ticked all the boxes. I didn't tick any of them, except I was kind of mildly white. But even there, I was born in Africa.
Yeah.
So it's a bit odd. And I thought we've reached a stage where this kind of diversity is accepted. And what a sign it will be to the world. I mean, I remember when Mary Robinson was elected, she didn't have to go on about women's rights. If I was elected to represent that final absolute acceptance of diversity, and it would be very good for the country, I thought, and for me. On the other hand, I have to say this. Perhaps they wanted to get rid of a liberal. They wanted to make sure a liberal didn't. They got one in Michael D.
Well, they did anyway.
I
don't know, electing a gay man as president, would that be a big deal anymore to us? I don't think it would, really.
For the establishment it was. There's no doubt about that. Because there was a lot of homophobia in it.
Who's the establishment?
Well, it's kind of an amorphous group that are able to pull strings and have a lot of power. Very difficult to put a finger on them, but they do exist, and they have more power than I imagined. But there were also other people. I mean, there was a false website set up in my name, which was rather unpleasant. There were a lot of tricks like that. And, you see, again, I come back, I would see myself as somebody who, if you smile at me, I will tell you my entire life story. And I've discovered, regrettably, that that's a mistake.
David, you tell them your life story even if they didn't smile at you.
Possibly, but now my instinct is, and I would open my mouth to stop, and I'll then stop. Because it is also such a dangerous world. People can record you on their cameras, on their telephones and so on. You're everywhere. And unfortunately, a lot of these things that got out that turned out not to be true, and the people who printed them and said them have accepted they were not true factually, but they've got out into the internet, they've got out into cyberspace, and they're there forever.
And it can't undo those things.
You can't undo them, and I'm still getting the backwash from that. In very unpleasant ways.
Do you think you had been cloistered to a certain degree because, you had been in academia, you had been a much-loved figure in the media, when, as a senator that's relatively insulated from the really nasty stuff, this is the first time really there where you saw just how
I'd
evil
had nasty
it could be.
stuff before. It's kind of an up and down.
Well, I suppose
not to the same extent, not to the same intensity.
Yeah.
And I genuinely felt that I was a decent person, that I'd be accepted as that. But when you're monstered, no matter what you do, a malign construction is put on it. Supposing, for example, when Ezra contacted me after the trial, after the conviction, and his lawyer asked me to write a letter of support for him, which people do. Supposing I'd said no, I'm not getting involved in that. It's too awful. And he'd taken his life. That would have been grist to their mill too.
Mm-hmm.
No, so I couldn't win.
No, you couldn't, and you do describe one incident where, you know, the mobs are outside the house and
Yes.
You're considering this plan to go over the roofs, but then they go, no, don't. If you fall, they say you killed yourself.
Yes. And wouldn't that have been a wonderful story? Can you just imagine?
It's amazing the way that your team thought about the headline rather than your actual death. I would have been a bit more concerned about that, really.
Well, I think they were concerned about both. But the wonderful thing was that I did escape. And that I did it, I think, with grace and nonchalance. And I went out to Monkstown, to Michael Abbey, and the press sat outside for 4 days, banging and hammering on my door, freezing, drinking cold soup and shivering. And, you know, I tried to have Christian compassion, but I'm actually quite pleased they had to go through that.
When you go to, because you go away to Cyprus a lot.
Yes.
Where do you go in Cyprus?
I bought a little derelict house about 12 years ago, up in the mountains, in a remote agricultural village, but they even followed me there. And my neighbours said, there's a very fishy-looking car. And I thought, you know, this is ridiculous. This is real conspiracy theory stuff. But they were photographing me. And we discovered that. And then there was a kind of a chase with the paparazzi after me. But I know the hairpin bends, and I know where my neighbours' vineyards are. And I whizzed off at a tremendous rate of knots and ditched them by ducking into a vineyard and watched them sailing past. But I do think that's unnecessary. And you know, I was written up by the crime reporter of one of the newspapers, so I don't know, you know, what crime did I commit? Maybe I was foolish and so on in some ways. We all are. We're all fallible people. But I don't think I'm a criminal anymore. I was born a criminal as a gay man, and I had to go through all of that, and that's recorded also in the book, including the moment when I defused a bomb on the Hirschfeld Central roof, when there were 250, 300 people in the disco, and if I hadn't actually spotted what was going on and dismantled it, there would have been a lot of casualties, maybe up to 300 people burnt to death.
How did you know how to defuse a bomb?
Well, I mean, when I say defuse, that's
Sorry, you know, I
shorthand.
should explain. People won't even remember what the Hirschfeld Centre was.
It was the gay community centre in Temple Bar, which actually started the whole of Temple Bar. There was nothing there before. And Elton John came to it, and Freddie Mercury, all these sort of people. I didn't know who they were, and I asked them for a membership. You know, it was extraordinary. But I was up in the office, and I could see through, there was a plexiglass roof, and I could see sparks, and I thought it was an electrical short circuit. And I went up, and there was a milk churn full of explosive. The roof was blazing with petrol, and there were 2 drums of petrol on either side of the milk churn. And the idea was to heat up the roof, explode the milk churn and blow the roof off and send the petrol down in sheets of flames. But I managed to get, I had brought up 2 fire extinguishers and just got it out.
Crikey. Are you done with politics now for good? Is that it?
No, I'm still in the Senate. I'm the father of the House. And I think that now we need more than ever a voice that will speak out, because when I got a debate on the media, and I didn't refer to the presidential election, I looked at things like the Leveson inquiry, where Tony Blair said that he was afraid of the media, and if you confronted them, they would go after you mercilessly, remorselessly, and ceaselessly, and your family, and even after you left office.
They will, you know.
So
I
actually, I got a debate, and my colleagues were very moderate in what they said. I gave it a lash. And when I sat down, they were applauding silently underneath the desk, so they couldn't be picked up by the microphones or the cameras. And that shows, you know, I'm afraid so much of the establishment now is cowed. The real political people. And I mean, I was actually told this was partly a reward for what I'd done in defeating the first defamation bill. And that is very sinister, you know. If powerful people in the media can try to silence an outspoken voice when they're doing their proper parliamentary duty, I think that raises questions. And people said to me, you know, you put your head up above the parapet, you can expect to get it knocked off. Well, frankly, I think in a republic, we should be able to dance on the parapet in freedom, don't you?
David, we have to leave it there. Thanks very much for coming into us today. The book is called A Kick Against the Pricks. David will be in Eason's in Portlaoise at 1 p.m. This Saturday, signing copies of